Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third annual Illinois Congressional Delegation breakfast. So I hope you're munching. The breakfast is for LGBTQ plus and HIV/AIDS advocates along with our delegation. And we are very pleased to have this program on Zoom this year because it allows us to better accommodate the many people who are interested in hearing from our Illinois delegation. So my name is Kim L. Hunt, and I'm the Executive Director of Pride Action Tank, a project of AIDS Foundation Chicago, where I also serve as the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy Operations. Our co-sponsors for this breakfast are Equality Illinois and Human Rights Campaign Chicago. So before we get started, I'll go over a bit of housekeeping. During the program, everyone will remain muted. AFC is recording this session and we're going to be sharing it later. Some of you submitted questions and comments when you registered, and so I want you to know that we aggregated most of them ahead of time for our elected officials to help them prepare their remarks, and some of the questions will be asked during the program. Based on your feedback, resources that help people recover from the pandemic, both medically and economically, healthcare access and equity, including Medicaid and Medicare and special enrollment during the because of the pandemic, voting, which includes voter suppression. Everyone is very concerned about the post office and the ability to vote by mail. The census, policing, and discrimination protections are top of mind for many of you. We'll also be monitoring the chat and the Q&A during the session, just in case there are additional questions and concerns that arise. So feel free to use those two options to put your comments and your questions in. Now, I know it's early. It's early for me too, but I promise it's going to be worth your while. We're going to get started with a brief panel that includes some amazing advocates who will talk to us about some of the issues that you offered during registration. Then we're going to have brief opening remarks from Representatives Mike Quigley, Raja Krishnamoorthi, Danny Davis, Robin Kelly, and Jan Schakowsky. They will then respond to as many of your questions as we can work in. So again, start posting them as soon as you think of them. This is a very important election year, as you know. So we're also going to be taking a short pause to talk about voting in Illinois. And then Senator Dick Durbin will hop on to provide some remarks. And afterwards, I'll come back to wrap up. I also want to be mindful that our elected schedules are super busy. So you may see people pop on and off. They are attentive, they are here to listen to you, but we're trying to work in their ability to be here as well as their ability to be elsewhere. So that is a lot. So we better get started and be respectful of everybody's time. So first up, we're going to have Justin from the Human Rights Campaign Chicago, who will introduce our panelists.
Thank you, Kim. All right, hopefully everyone can hear me all right. Good morning. Thank you. And my name is Justin Kozatek, Political Action and Community Engagement Liaison with Human Rights Campaign Chicago. It's a pleasure to be here to introduce you to our panel. Their remarks will be made in the order of their introduction. First up is Aisha N. Davis, Esquire, is the Director of Policy at AIDS Foundation of Chicago. She was born and raised in the Washington, D.C. metro area, or the DMV. Aisha attended Columbia Law School and participated in a dual degree program with the University of London School of Oriental and African Studies. At the conclusion of her dual degree program, Aisha obtained a JD and an LLM specializing in human rights, conflict, and justice. Throughout the course of her legal education, Aisha has worked on human and civil rights both domestically and internationally. Aisha's scholarship on intersectional issues has been featured in the Columbia Journal, Gender and Sexuality Law Online, and Harvard Human Rights Journal. She has also enjoyed blogging, and her work has been featured on the Frisky for Harriet and the Center for Intersectionality and Social Policy Studies blog. Welcome, Aisha. Next, we have Oswaldo Alvarez, with over 10 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, ranging from ground level program implementation to philanthropy and public policy implementation. Most recently, Alvarez served as program officer at Grand Victoria Foundation, where he oversaw the place-based funding in Elgin, Illinois. From 2007 to 2012, Alvarez directed workforce development initiatives at Erie Neighborhood House, guiding the program from a pilot with no budget to a fully staffed department. Fluent Spanish speaker, he earned his master's in social policy from the University of Chicago and a bachelor's in economics and political science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He'll be speaking on the census. And then our last panelist is Quinn Kareem Rallins. So in April 2019, the Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton appointed him as director of the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity JEO initiative, created through executive order by Governor Pritzker. Rallins designs and implements policies and programs across state agencies and advises decision-making to ensure the different branches of Illinois government work to proactively create a more equitable criminal justice system. Previously, Quinn worked as the program director of the Illinois Justice Project, Community Justice Law Fellow at the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law, and several years as a community organizer managing successful campaigns throughout the United States to address issues such as mass incarceration, healthcare, housing, and educational inequity. For his work, he has been recognized as a Harvard Galbraith Inequality Scholar, Economic and Political Studies Scholar at Cambridge University, and is 2020 Leadership Greater Chicago Fellow. Ooh, made it through. Okay. Quinn serves as the boards of Chapin Hall at the University of Chicago, Chicago Lawyers Committee, and St. Leonard's Ministries, among others. Rallins has a bachelor's degree from Morehouse College, master's in policy from Oxford University, and law degree from Northeastern University School of Law. All right, excellent. Yeah, that concludes our panelists.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Aisha, as Justin said. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am going to be providing a little bit of information about the congressional response to the COVID-19 pandemic thus far. So I'm going to start with the CARES Act, even though it was not the first federal piece of legislation that went into place as a result of this pandemic. It is the largest one and one of the more comprehensive bills that did go into effect. So in March, both the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate passed the $2.2 trillion CARES Act stimulus package, which was signed by the president. And in important points, it included $275 million to assist the Health Resources and Services Administration, which also helps to fund the Ryan White HIV/AIDS program. In addition, there was $65 million allocated for the Housing Opportunities for Persons Living with AIDS, or HOPWA. There were $8.8 billion allocated to child nutrition programs, as well as $15.51 billion for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. The Emergency Food Assistance Program was given $450 million, or TFAP. So for the CARES Act, which was passed and signed into law, passed in late March, signed into law in April, a lot of that funding has been used. A lot of it was allocated, and it was allocated broadly. So that was one of the things that we really noticed about the CARES Act, and that we were really appreciative when that funding came down and when it was signed into law. So after the CARES Act, however, when we saw the funding kind of running out, the Payment Protection Plan was included in the CARES Act. There was a question as to what other assistance would be provided, because we, I think, realized very quickly that this pandemic wasn't going to be a 1, 2, or 3 bill pandemic. We would need to have at least a 4th or 5th bill come down. So Later in April, there was what was considered an interim COVID-19 relief package, only considered interim because it was not as large as the CARES Act, and there was an understanding that there would be a larger one coming after this interim supplemental package. So on around April 20th, the US Congress drafted the interim COVID-19 relief package, which was kind of focusing on the paycheck program and healthcare enhancement. That bill included $331 billion to boost small business payroll loan programs, which was the Paycheck Protection Program. $75 billion was allocated to hospitals. $25 billion was used to boost testing for COVID-19. I will say that both of our senators voted to pass that interim measure. And then in addition, there were $484 billion in total for that one package. So although it was a pretty hefty number considering, I guess, the numbers that we usually think about, the bill did not include any additional state fiscal relief. There was no additional funding for SNAP. There was no additional funding for housing programs, including HOPWA or the Ryan White program. So after the interim package passed in April, around May 15th, the House of Representatives pulled together the HEROES Act. Now, the HEROES Act was one of the largest, most comprehensive packages that we saw. It included $1 trillion that was supposed to be allocated to state, local, territorial, and tribal governments who desperately need funds right now because every state, I believe, is facing a serious deficit, including the state of Illinois. I believe our deficit is projected to be over $7 billion over the next year or two. In addition, the HEROES Act wants to allocate $200 billion to a fund to help support essential workers, $75 billion for COVID-19 testing, an additional direct payment. So in addition to the funding that came from the CARES Act, which was $1,200 per family member, or $1,200 per adult family member, and then $500 per child, there would have been another round of those checks released, and to have a cap at $6,000 per household, which sounds like a lot, but if you have a family with a lot of people in it, $6,000 might not be a cap that feels comfortable for you. Additionally, there were some provisions put in place in the HEROES Act, or there were ambitious provisions added to the HEROES Act that would have prevented any discrimination based on COVID-19 status. They also included sections on worker safety, payroll protection, support for businesses and nonprofits, healthcare coverage, unemployment benefits, well, especially an extension on the supplemental $600 unemployment benefits that folks have been receiving weekly, which have now been discontinued. And then other assistance for housing and food security, as well as funding that would help to protect the safety of our elections coming up. In response to this extremely comprehensive bill that I believe topped off around $3 trillion, the GOP released the HEALS Act, which, unlike the other comprehensive omnibus legislative or bills that were proposed, the HEALS Act was spread across a number of bills and included significant funding asks that did not seem to be related to the COVID-19 pandemic as far as my interpretation and analysis of it goes, which includes funding for an FBI building in DC. As someone from DC, I thought about that as something that might not be as necessary to folks in DC right now. But the HEALS Act did want to slash the supplemental unemployment checks from $600 to $200. The HEALS Act did not include any protection for the voter, or for any voter protection or election security. There was no provision included to discuss any kind of hate crime or discrimination that people might be facing in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. There was no expansion of paid sick leave in the HEALS Act. There would be a one-time $1,200 payment per, I think, adult, and then $500 per dependent. But I don't believe that there was a cap listed in the HEALS Act. I might be wrong. I can definitely double check. In addition, there was no support for the level of hazard pay that the HEROES Act included. And in addition, there were some more tax cuts that were made available to businesses who wanted to write off certain expenses. So in addition, there is a way for corporations to not be sued if someone contracts COVID-19 in their business place. So the HEALS Act and HEROES Act are drastically different. And I believe that from our perspective, the HEROES Act was more comprehensive. Of course, there were additional asks that we at AFC have been talking about. One of the biggest things that we've been discussing during this pandemic is the need for broad systemic change, the issues of equity that have come up during the pandemic, especially around healthcare access, especially given the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on Black and Latinx communities and Indigenous communities. We are hoping that the next supplemental package, or not supplemental, the next package that comes from Congress includes some funding for states to be able to bridge the gap that these deficits are creating due to the pandemic. We're hoping that there is additional unrestricted funding for state, local, territorial, and tribal governments. We're also hoping that there would, including additional funding for both the Ryan White program and for HAPA because of the significant impact that this pandemic has had on people's ability to have their needs met, especially around housing. We would ask there would be additional funding around healthcare, especially a special enrollment period, given the number of folks who are now finding themselves without healthcare coverage. And we would hope that there would be significant investment in the healthcare sector in regards to PPE available to healthcare workers, especially our essential workers who are really out there making sure that we're able to continue moving along. Additionally, we are hoping that any of the expansions or continuations of support are not restricted based on citizenship status. We know that there are residents across this country and across the state of Illinois who are not only contributing to our communities, but also paying taxes, who also deserve and should have the support needed during this very unprecedented time. In addition to that, we are hoping that Congress pushes for moratoria on evictions, especially around this time as we are coming into the fall, and soon we'll be facing a winter during this pandemic. And I think that that might be everything. I know that we are hoping that all of the funding that is related to food and nutrition, housing supports, employment support, especially unemployment, supplemental unemployment payments, and any healthcare expansions are extended throughout the course of this pandemic and beyond. Right now, our conversations are not just about what's going to be happening as COVID-19 continues to impact our communities, but also what our communities look like after the COVID-19 pandemic has ended. We are really at a very unique moment in time where we have the opportunity to not only address the very imminent threat of COVID-19, but also discuss the ways that we prevent something like this from happening again. This level of devastation could have been prevented. The response to it could have also been much more robust. So our goal really is to encourage some more responsiveness. Right now, we are in the middle of waiting to see what happens with the fourth large COVID-19 relief package. We're hopeful that our Illinois Congressional Delegation will support us and continue to fight for our communities. And I believe that that is it for me. I'll go ahead and hand it off to Oswaldo.
Okay, thank you. And thank you again, everyone, for the invitation. Specifically, I want to thank Pride Action Tank and Kim for all of your leadership and for everything you do. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Oswaldo Alvarez. I help direct the census efforts for the state of Illinois. The census, this is the very first time that the state of Illinois has a census office. The census office was created by executive order of Governor J.B. Pritzker. And it was actually a response of all of the attacks that have been happening to the census by the administration. As you all know, the census is one of the very few tools that we all have to twist government's arm to represent us and to invest in us. Each one of us, each person, approximately represents about $1,500 per person per year. So about $15,000 over the course of a decade. So that is one, right? The resources that come into our communities, from our schools to our parks to the potholes, all of that is all determined by census data. But also what census data does, of course, for all of the research, for all of you urban planners here, right? Aside from all of that, the other thing that the census does is that it determines the redistricting maps. And so some of the things that we know about what happens with the census is that if we don't have an accurate count, we don't have accurate representation. So one of the examples that I was just giving before I started with before we started the panel, we were talking about Back of the Yards. That neighborhood actually has the lowest count, the lowest response rate in the whole city of Chicago. And that neighborhood, for example, has about 4 different aldermen representing the neighborhood. The neighborhood is split into many different ways because it doesn't have that accurate count that we need in order to have a district that represents the neighborhood for itself. So I guess let me, just so that I can, as you all know, well, the census is our operation. COVID-19 really, we had to pivot a whole lot of our strategy to be able to continue our efforts. And so the census got extended until October 31st. And then recently we just heard that from the US Census Bureau that they wanted to shorten the deadline to September 30th. So that's actually what we are operating with. As a state, the state of Illinois, we rank number 7 in the nation. We have about 69.3% response rate. Just for some reference, in 2010, the overall response rate reached 70.5. We are at 69.3. Plus the enumeration, the door knocking that started on August 9th, we are now at about 82% response rate. So as a state, we are actually doing, and we are the number 1 in the Midwest when you combine both the door knocking and the soft response. Out of the top 10, we are the most populous state. So for example, just to give some reference, the state of Nebraska, for example, is number 3 because they had about 800,000 people counted. The state of Illinois is number 7 because we had like about 4 million people counted. So just to give you some reference, right? So in many ways, we feel like we're number 1. And the city of Chicago is leading all cities of over 2 million people. So we are leading Houston, we are leading LA, and we're leading New York. But with all of that, there's still a lot of work ahead of us, right? As I just mentioned, all of these numbers sound amazing, right? 80%, 70%. Well, the 30s are Englewood, Back of the Yards, Little Village. These neighborhoods, here I can even go down, West Garfield Park, I can keep going down the list, right? These neighborhoods are neighborhoods that are predominantly people of color, of course, they're Black and brown communities. And these communities, many of these communities, one, the census, they might be afraid of the census because it is a government, it is the government coming in and asking for questions and what have you. And what we are doing at the state is we have implemented a strategy where we work with over 360 nonprofits, and those nonprofits are the ones who are knocking on doors. They are the ones who are trying to deliver the message to people. I guess, you know, a lot of, still, again, a lot of work ahead of us. September 30th is right around the corner. One of the things that we want to emphasize is that the census is safe. The census does not have a citizenship question. The administration recently issued a memo at the end of July, again, trying to incite fear on people. And this is just, you know, just like the U.S. Postal Office is getting attacked, people never thought the census would get attacked, or I don't know if attack is probably the word, maybe used as a tool of intimidation. And so one of the things that we try to tell people is that if they are trying to use this as a tool of intimidation, it's because this is a tool that is ours, and this is a tool that we can use to intimidate them. So one of the things that I tell people is the numbers are against them, and they know that, and the census will prove that. And so because of that, we need everyone's help, everyone here, to please help us deliver the message. please reach out to folks in your block. If we had 5 more people per block counted, we would reach over 80% response rate in the entire entire city of Chicago. So just to give you some reference, just 5 more people per block. So we can all do a little bit. Please always feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about our work, how you can help. Our website is census.illinois.gov. And with that, thank you so much, everyone. And Quinn, I'll pass it to you.
Great, thank you. So I want to thank you all for having me here. I just want to acknowledge Jacob Blake and his family, and I want to thank the congressional leaders who are on the call who have been working tirelessly to think about criminal justice reform and policing reform at a national level, because we need it. So I direct the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative, as was stated, is pursuant to an executive order by Governor Pritzker, and it's under the leadership of Lieutenant Governor Stratton. And in many ways, it's the state's first real effort to centralize criminal justice reform efforts towards what we call restorative justice, and shifting from the traditional punitive policies that the state has traditionally embraced. One of the things the Lieutenant Governor always says is one of the most important principles of restorative justice is recognizing that the wisdom is in the room, and we need to equip communities to solve their own problems and shift from the traditional criminal justice system. So one of the first things we did when we came into the administration was we went to listen to young people who many of the young people are outraged right now about what's happening in this country. But we went deep into the justice system. We went to the police stations where they were taken to. We went to the jails where they were housed. We went to juvenile courts where they're processed and listened to the hearings. But we also went to the prisons that they had been taken to. So, as many of you all know, there are, 5 youth prisons in Illinois right now. There's one in Chicago. There's one in St. Charles, Illinois. There's one in Warrenville, Pierre Marquette, and Harrisburg, Illinois. And I remember talking to one young person during one of our visits, and one of the things he told me, he was like, Quinn, it's just like the movies. He was like, I was taken far away from my family. I was given a number. I was given a bologna sandwich, and I was treated in inhumane ways, in ways that he never expected to be treated as a 15, 16-year-old person. So, we made an announcement about 4 or 5 weeks ago. We had a press conference, and under the leadership of the governor, the lieutenant governor, the Department of Juvenile Justice, in coordination with our Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative, we announced what's called the 21st Century Illinois Transformation Plan. And it comes out of a few conversations that we had with these young people. And essentially what we heard were 3 things. One is that they were tired of being far away from their families, and they wanted to be closer to home. Right now in Illinois, only 15% of youth have regular family visits. Many of them, as you all know, we tell the narrative, some of them, for example, in Chicago, have never been downtown. And the first place that they're taken to this away from their community is 4 or 5 hours, sometimes in Southern Illinois. Sometimes it's 80% Black children and 90% white staff. It creates very difficult dynamics that I think is a part of the racial justice conversation that we're having right now. And we didn't just talk to young people, we talked to their parents. And they said, when I want to see my kid, at best quarterly, every 4 months, I have to take off from work. I have to pay for childcare. I have to drive 4 hours. Sometimes I have to get a hotel. It's a very difficult process to be able to keep in deep touch with. We also heard from families, young people, adults that they needed smaller facilities. So for example, right now, you know, our Department of Juvenile Justice, the facilities we have is traditionally for about 1,000 young people. And we've reduced our population dramatically over the last few years by ensuring that we try to reduce recidivism, et cetera. There's about 100 young people in there right now. But they're in these huge facilities, barbed wire, prison-like facilities. These facilities were traditionally for adults. And we've created conditions where young people are tired of being in facilities where they aren't being rehabilitated in the ways that they want to. So that's another thing that we heard. And the third thing is they talked about is love. And they didn't just talk about it from, you know, a theoretical, you know, agape type of way. They talked about it in terms of investment. They said that you never invested in us from the front end, and we don't know what investment looks like when we're leaving these facilities. So one of the things we have been thinking about is how we reinvest in communities that these young people are from, and shifting those investments from the Department of Juvenile Justice, but also investing in these young people for when they come home. Many of these community-based organizations that serve these young people want to help, and they're in many ways more equipped often than government. So we announced the 21st Century Transformation Plan, and it's a 4-year plan essentially. And we're going to do a few things. The first phase is really starting to think about how we have regional facilities that cater to different communities, so the young people are not 4 or 5 hours away from their families, and they can be housed just geographically. We haven't even gotten to whether facilities, but just in terms of equity in place, ensuring that they are within distance to the communities that love, care about them, the family, they want to stay in touch with them. And these young people will be coming home. They will be coming home. The second thing is smaller facilities. So one of the things we've done is we've talked to other states like Missouri, New York, and DC. It's talked about smaller facilities. So we're looking at building up dorm-like facilities, the types of facilities that are able to give young people the type of attention, resources, and services that they need while they're under the protection of our Department of Juvenile Justice as they're transitioning back home. But the third thing is starting to shift our resources to community-based providers. So I'll give one example. Right now, and we just did this for the Department of Juvenile Justice, we know that young people who are coming, who are justice involved, many of them, if they're going to have health care, it's primarily going to be through, you know, public benefits, Medicaid, et cetera. That's traditionally where their family is going to be on, primarily because of the communities that these young people come from. And in our Department of Juvenile Justice, 95% of them have a diagnosable mental health condition. 95%. Depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, et cetera. If we want these young people to be successful as they're coming home, we need to ensure, A, that they have health care in hand upon release, but also that there are community-based providers who are able to walk them through there. So that if they get 2 weeks worth of medication, when that runs out, they can help them navigate these complex healthcare systems, et cetera. That's not just the job of the state. That's the job of community-based organizations, and we can't just ask them to do that without supporting. So we have a multi-pronged plan of doing that, ramping up investments in community-based organizations, reentry programs, but also identifying the types of facilities that we ultimately want these young people to be in, dorm-like facilities. And we're having conversations with our Department of Corrections about shifting these facilities that were traditionally for adults historically to Department of Corrections, to be under the supervision of Department of Corrections. They need more space, et cetera. But it's also an opportunity for us to think about how we use, we introduce rehabilitative and restorative justice practices in the corrections in terms of the way their facilities also could be used. So we're excited about this. We're excited about a range of different types of things. And the last thing I'll say is that we've done a few things that partner with this initiative. One, we've started to beef up reinvestment throughout the state. We have the R3 program, which is taking money from cannabis and putting it into communities, 25% of the revenue of that. But also we know that these young people will continue to flow into the justice system if we don't do legislative change. So the governor and lieutenant governor have announced, earlier this year that we expect to move on criminal justice reform during this administration. That includes dealing with bail reform, dealing with mandatory minimum sentences, and punitive sentencing for that matter. So we're excited about moving on all fronts in this effort within the Department of Juvenile Justice towards a restorative justice approach as a part of a larger vision that's been set forth by the administration. And we look forward to working with all of you. With that, I'll pass it to the next person who is up.
Great, thank you so much. And let's give a virtual round of applause to our panelists here. And thank you for sharing your wisdom with us this morning. So thank you very much. I am Mike Ziri. I'm the Public Policy Director at Equality Illinois. My pronouns are he, him, his. And thank you, Kim. Thank you, Pride Action Tank and the Human Rights Campaign for having me here and helping organize this great event today. And it's my honor now to moderate the next section of the program. And we have 5 members of the U.S. House of Representatives with us this morning. Really excited for that. They'll each make opening statements in order of the introduction. And then afterwards, we want to hear from you. So don't forget to add your questions to the chat or the Q&A. So I will read their names real quick, and then we'll start with opening statements. But with us today, we have Representative Raja Krishnamoorthi of Illinois' 8th District, Representative Mike Quigley of Illinois' 5th District, Representative Danny Davis of Illinois' 7th District, Representative Robin Kelly of Illinois' 2nd District, and Representative Jan Schakowsky of Illinois' 9th District. And for opening remarks, we'll start with Representative Raja Krishnamoorthi. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. And thank you to the panelists. I was listening very carefully to what they were saying, and I echo many of their sentiments. And I just want to say thank you to each of them for their excellent presentations. I want to say a special thank you to Mike and, of course, Equality Illinois. I'd like to say thank you to AIDS Foundation of Chicago, the Human Rights Campaign. I love to say the Pride Action Tank, because it's not just a think tank. It's about doing, not just thinking. And so I'm so glad to join them and Kim Hunt as well. I'm going to keep my remarks very brief, observing those 3 rules of public speaking: be short, be sweet, and be gone. The first point I want to make is kind of more general about how I and I think all of the members of the Illinois delegation that are on this call have been working extremely hard with regard to trying to push the HEROES Act, as well as its component parts through Congress. We are in an unprecedented pandemic health and economic crisis. And of course, we're trying to deal with systemic discrimination and racism, which roils our society at the same time. And my thoughts go to the family, the Blake family as well, in Kenosha. Right now, the status of these items is we have put forward our initial bid, so to speak, our initial offer in the form of the HEROES package in a very systematic and detailed way. And quite frankly, the other side came back kind of in a confused disarray in terms of not even being on the same page within their own caucus as to items such as state and local aid, which I think is absolutely important, especially for Illinois and Chicago. And it's not a partisan issue. I get questions every day from Republicans, Democrats, and independents who happen to be leading their cities and towns and villages, asking how they can get help to avoid further layoffs, cuts in service, or God forbid, tax raises, because they are seeing their revenue drop during this pandemic. I also believe we have to continue with the supplement for unemployment insurance. What the Republicans and the president proposed, I think, is laughable in light of the gravity of the economic situation right now. Stimulus checks, again, another round of stimulus checks for all families and individuals. Aid to schools that are reopening. And of course, I have to touch upon the post office. This is something that is incredibly important. As you know, during this pandemic, our postal system is crucial. It's a vital communications and delivery lifeline for hundreds of millions of people, many of whom are vulnerable populations who don't want to go and congregate at stores or who need their life-saving medications. And right now, unfortunately, the Postmaster General has cut services dramatically, which will have a severe delay on these individuals and families and businesses, but also potentially the election. And so yesterday I had the opportunity to cross-examine Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, as well as Mike Duncan, the chairman of the Board of Governors. And quite frankly, I do think that the line has blurred between politics and the post office. And Mike Duncan in particular, who's the head of the post office, is also the head of 2 Republican super PACs, believe it or not. I could not believe when I read this initially that this is still the case. But that's what's going on at the post office, and we have to stop it. And so I just want to touch upon that because, as you know, so many HIV medications and other life-saving medications for so many people in the LGBTQ community come through the mail. So this is vital for all of us. Now let me just touch on 2 other things. One, I'm proud to have signed on to increased appropriations for research into funding to support HIV prevention, healthcare, research, and treatment. This is incredibly important because we still have not done away with the scourge of HIV. There's much work to be done, and I'm very supportive of additional funding there. And then finally, I'd like to touch on my own legislation, which is of incredible importance, I believe, to all Americans and young people, but especially the LGBTQ community, and that is called the Stop Bullying Act. My legislation was introduced last year at actually the Kenneth Young Center, which perhaps many of you are familiar with, which is in the suburbs and in my district. And basically, this act tries to model a nationwide effort on what is being done currently in Illinois, which is setting up anti-bullying task forces in the state to then commit to carrying out reforms in the school system about how to prevent bullying of young people. This especially afflicts LGBTQ youth, but it really afflicts anybody who doesn't look like someone in the mainstream. And as a racial, religious, and ethnic minority person myself, I'm especially sensitive to this. And the only way that we're gonna prevent bullying and prevent discrimination is starting at the youngest ages in school. And so we're trying to provide support at the federal level through this legislation for efforts like what happened in Illinois and try to get it to happen elsewhere too. So with that, I just want to say thank you again to all of you for your incredible dedication to all efforts involving equality and preventing discrimination against anybody. I'm so grateful for your efforts, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to just speak to you for a couple minutes this morning. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Representative. Next, Representative Mike Quigley, who happens to also be my congressman.
Good morning, thank you. I want to echo my colleague, Raja, for putting this on and the great work you do. I think the most important thing that my colleagues and I can say to you is thank you for what you do on an everyday basis. You know, in the last 4 years of craziness that we have lived through, maybe the most common question we get is, what can I do during this time. And I think you live it. You take care of each other. The open panelists said it best, talked about love. You love each other, you take care of each other. In the final analysis, we can't meet the hatred that we're living with the equal hatred. It has to be through the care that you show for each other. And we greatly appreciate that. Raj and I were in DC yesterday questioning about the Postal Service, but each of us has so many issues we're trying to address. But we know we need you more now more than ever. And I do want to thank especially those involved with the census, because it's only every 10 years I can say this. This really matters, not just for the federal aid that's so important, but you know, Illinois faces a very real threat of losing representation in Congress at a time when we really need it most. I do want to give a shout out. We are funding in the manner that you all talked about the government through the stimulus, the COVID aid packages. At the same time, we're appropriating, and as appropriator, you should know, for example, the House passed a hell of an act, appropriations bill on the 30th anniversary of Ryan White HIV/AIDS program. It is under the labor HHS appropriations bill, a real robust funding for HIV/AIDS treatment, research, and development. So don't lose track of that. There's more than one thing happening here. And, you know, we want to get to heroes past. Speaker Pelosi talked about a compromise, offered to meet halfway, was rebuffed. People should understand that. At the same time, we need to get as much of the heroes package and the law as we possibly can. Given our time constraints, let me pass it on. Thank you again.
Great. Thank you, Representative. Next, Representative Robin Kelly.
You would think I would know how to do this, Mike. Thanks, Mike. Good to see everyone. Thank you for everything everyone does. Good to see my colleagues. I, too, was with Raja and Mike because I'm on the oversight committee for the post office. So Raja let us off. I was in the middle, and Mike rounded it out for us at the end.
And you did a great job.
I tried. It's tough. Mike talked about some of the budgeting, but I just wanted to put numbers to it. We were able to win $11 billion more than President Trump put in, requested for the HIV/AIDS program. We also increased overall funding by $1.5 billion over last year's budget. The greatest increases were in NIH research funding and our quest for a cure. So I clap for Mike Quigley, since he's one of our cardinals. On the border issues of LGBT equality, the Supreme Court ruling was a huge win for LGBT workers. Now they know they can't be fired for who they love or who they are. But again, elections have consequences. The mechanisms to codify this ruling in law, the Equality Act, still sits like so many bills on Mitch McConnell's desk. He calls himself the Grim Reaper. I cannot think of a better term for him. I also want to give thoughts and prayers to Blake's family in Kenosha. I just sent a text to CBC Chair Karen Bass that we cannot let the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act be put on the back burner. I know COVID is first and foremost on everyone's mind, you know, the post office, but we cannot let that go by the wayside. And I want to assure everyone who's in my district, I've done about 12 to 13 census events. I just did a census caravan on the south side of Chicago, where in the 7th ward, it's low, and we're trying to bring that up. I have districts, parts of my district that are over 80%, and then, like you said, some are way, way low. And lastly, I just want to personally thank all of you, Mike, you're one of them, Kim, for attending my LGBTQ roundtables. They are actually one of the best things that we decided to do, and I've learned so much from you guys. I hope you've gotten something out of them, and I promise we will do another one in 2020 with another outstanding speaker or a member of Congress. So thank you guys so much for attending. I really, really appreciate it. And I will sign off. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Representative. And last but certainly not least, Representative Jan Schakowsky.
Well, thank you so much. What a tremendous panel we just heard from, really covering the waterfront of some of the really important issues. I had a couple of questions myself that I wanted to start with. I wanted, let's see, Oswaldo, you referred to what we heard that the president did, shorten the time for the census to the end of September. Can the president actually do that on his own? Is there anything that would prevent him from cutting the census short? I thought it had to reach a certain percentage before the census tracking could be stopped. Lose you.
Okay, there. Sorry, I was also trying to figure it out. Thank you so much for your question. The census what actually, how to say it? So the original deadlines of everything, and this is by statutory of what the deadlines were. July 31st was when the census, the enumeration would conclude. The data will be given to the president on December of 2020, and then the states received the redistricting data by April of 2021. So at first, when COVID hit, we had asked if to extend everything by 3 months. Initially, the president did show support that we would be able to change the December deadline, the deadline that would go the data to the president, to March of 2021. Based on maybe everything that is going on, the president changed his mind. And now the data, he wants the data to be given to him on December of 2020, how it is by statutory law, right? How it is that we were supposed to do it to begin with. So because of that, everything had to get shortened to September 30th, because we were like, okay, that means that we got to do this now, because otherwise we don't really have an option at this point. And just to give some background, the extension of the date of the deadline, it did need congressional approval. It was passed during the HEROES Act. It was part of the COVID Relief Act. But when the HEALS Act came in, it was removed. So at that point, we were like, we don't know what to do now. So we just like had to like, at this point, we're thinking September 30th, and that's why we're moving the way we're moving.
Wow, I mean, that's around the corner. That is actually just a few days from now. I wanted to say to Aisha, you talked about the HEROES Act and then their act. Did you know that despite the fact that we passed, the Democrats did in the HEROES Act, a very robust nutrition part of it that would have increased child nutrition and adult nutrition programs and the SNAP program? They took all that out, and instead what they did was double the tax exemption for corporate lunches. If there's anything that I think describes the difference in values, that has got to be it. And let me just say to Quinn, I want to agree with my colleagues that we are going to move ahead with criminal justice reform. We are going to move ahead with the Justice in Policing Act as hard as we can. But we know that the real changes are going to come after the next election. And so I just wanted to emphasize that. As someone who was one of the original founders of the Equality Caucus and a chief co-sponsor of the Equality Act and the proud grandmother of a trans young man, I'm totally on the same page with all of you, and just want to thank you for the variety of issues that you are completely immersed with, and we stand with you every step of the way. So thank you so much. I yield back.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, representatives, for your introductory remarks. And now we have, a little time for a few questions from participants. And Several of you have mentioned the Justice in Policing Act, and one of the questions we've gotten is what is being done to push for police reform across the nation to prevent more murders at the hands of poorly trained police officers with a history of abuse of their power. And,
if I could just jump in for 1 second. So people have mentioned, my colleagues have mentioned Jacob Blake, and it was reported today that he is now paralyzed from the waist down. I mean, it is just the most tragic and unacceptable example of why we have to have this, this legislation. And it's just mind-boggling that every day it seems to happen again, no matter what. We aren't going to give up on this.
Mike, are you saying the person wants more of an explanation of the Justice and Policing Act, the no chokeholds, the no knock warrants, there'll be a list of police officers that may have been fired from one police department and now they cannot be hired at another police department. That's what happened in Cleveland with the young man with the gun. We have, training so that we have some cultural competency. I don't love that word, but we need to do something, so that there's not this fear that it seems to be of Black and brown men. But there's a host of things like that we're working on. I actually have legislation with Kwame Raoul that will give attorney generals the ability to investigate pattern and practice. Some have it now and some don't have it now. In the George Floyd Policing Act, there's grant money to help, but in Illinois, our Attorney General doesn't even have the authority to do it. So we're trying to do that across the United States. I can't remember every single one, maybe someone else does.
No, I think Robin did a good job touching on those main points in the act. And again, I'm going to make a pitch for people to, as they follow Congress and they try to influence what we do, that they follow the appropriation process. Robin mentioned grants. This has to happen on an ongoing basis, right? You can't just do it one time. It would be absolutely critical for us to pass this legislation out of the Senate and for a better president to sign it. But we need to, on an ongoing basis, handle this issue through the appropriation process. And one more example of that is the demilitarization of police force that we've become all too familiar with. Again, that can be handled as we deal with the budget and as we fund government.
And let me just say, this issue would not have even been on the agenda had it not been for the incredible organizing that took place around the country. It wasn't expected to come up, despite the fact that every week almost, or every day, we see these kinds of misuse of power by the police. So I just want to point out, those of you who are activists, that it really, really matters, because we would not have even considered this legislation had not across the country, really literally millions of people come out and demand justice.
Can I just jump in?
Could have those, I was gonna say, we could have those of you who have relatives, families, and friends that live in other states. Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth are with us. It's the Kentuckys and the South Carolinas and the Arizonas. We really need to put the pressure on those senators, especially those in tight races.
I was just going to say, Robin did a great job summarizing the Justice and Police Reform Act. I think the crux of it, if I just look at it, is the Senate passed basically reforms that encouraged different efforts, and what we did is we made them into law. In other words, we're past encouraging people, we're past incentivizing people. Now it's time to actually put things in law and require, for instance, national training standards. We can't have training standards that vary from one place to another about the use of deadly force, because quite frankly, in some places you just can't trust what the local standards will be, given their history of racism and so forth. The other thing I just want to mention is we are not going to tolerate President Trump sending in troops or law enforcement personnel to try to create havoc on the streets of Chicago or any city in Illinois. And I think we are united in this particular sentiment. We don't tolerate violence of any kind. And of course, Mayor Lightfoot and Governor Pritzker are going to work together and appropriately with federal law enforcement to coordinate a response. But we're not going to allow or tolerate the president sending in troops that would, basically create a militarized situation on the streets in Illinois. So I just wanted to mention that too.
Great, thank you. And we've had some great questions roll in. We do have a few more minutes for this segment, so I want to ask one. What specific actions are being done to protect voting rights at this time?
We're so polite. Who wants to jump in first?
Let me remind folks that Illinois was the first state 4 years ago this month to be hacked by the Russians. So I am concerned of threats on election integrity internally and externally. So just from an external point of view, Comey said the Russians will be back. Many since then from Trump's team have admitted that they never left. So that threat still exists, and we're fighting for grants to protect there, because a threat is a threat. The internal threats are, in some respects, more troubling as to the attacks on the Postal Service. Granted, how important that role is going to be in a year. This will be the year of the vote by mail in most important presidential election of our time. So that's just two shots. I know my colleagues have more.
Well, one thing we have to take responsibility. If you are voting by mail, once you get that ballot, fill it out and mail it in immediately. Do not wait. That helps. And also, if you can vote early, please vote early. There are things each individual can do to make sure that your vote is counted.
I think that it's only appropriate to remember John Lewis as we talk about voting rights. Each and every one of us on this Zoom call had a personal relationship with this legend, and I don't use that word lightly. And he fought and bore the scars of earning the right to vote for all of us. And so it's only incumbent on us to make sure that everyone exercises that right and to continue to pass a restoration of the Voting Rights Act, which we did, but we got to get it through the Senate and the White House to make sure we reverse the horrible decision in Shelby versus Holder, Supreme Court decision that basically allows Southern states to reintroduce the suppression of votes all over, not just Southern states, but many others as well. So that is going to be a marker for the next president and vice president, whoever he and she are.
Well, let me just say the silence that followed the question is no indication of the kind of attention that is being paid to the issue of voter suppression and making sure that the votes are not stolen. We have an incredible team that is focused exclusively on the issue of ending and rooting out voter suppression. 2 hearings now. I'm not on the committee, so maybe we can hear a little more about the Postmaster General DeJoy and this effort right now to take away the sorting machines, to take away your neighborhood mailbox. And he has simply lied about he says it happened way before he ever came there. There's clearly been at least a 10% decrease and slowdown in the mail service. The union is absolutely energized right now and active in pointing out the things that are going on in terms of the mail. Robin Kelly is absolutely right. If you're going to vote by mail, do it quickly. Don't wait until the end of the process where the president has already said and the White House that they cannot guarantee that all those votes will be counted. Imagine. And the other thing is we would like to win on election day. So, make sure that you do early voting, and those who can, go to the polls. If it gets dragged out, it could be, much more controversial. We need to win big. We need to get every single person out to vote. And that's going to be a real mission of us, particularly with young people. Those who are less likely and less inclined to vote, those are our target voters, and let's get them out.
Great, thank you so much for answering. And unfortunately for Q&A, that's all the time we have right now. As Kim said, we have a lot to cover in the time for this great event. But let's please everyone give a thank you to our great members of Congress who have participated today. Representative Mike Quigley, Representative Raja Krishnamoorthi, Representative Jan Schakowsky, Representative Robin Kelly. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. I will say that there's a lot of more questions that I could have asked, but for the sake of time, unfortunately, won't be able to, but thank you. And now it's my pleasure to turn the program over to Timothy Jackson.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Mike, for moderating that last portion of our program. My name is Timothy Jackson. I'm the Director of Government Relations at AIDS Foundation Chicago. I'm going to briefly speak this morning, about voting here in Illinois during this very important election year, and exactly what's at stake. We know that to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and to allow more people to exercise their right to vote from the safety of their own homes, if they so choose, state legislators approved language in May of this year that created a vote by mail process for the November the 3rd general election. All voters who participated in either the 2018 general midterm elections, the 2019 municipal elections, and or the 2020 primary elections held back in March, will automatically receive an application to vote by mail in late September 2020. If those voters who wish to vote by mail, they will need to complete that application and return it to the designated election authority listed on the application. All voters who submit an application for a mail-in ballot before October 1 will receive their ballot no later than October 6, 2020. As has been said by several members of the Congressional Delegation, we strongly encourage you to return those completed ballots as soon as possible. There will be secure drop-off boxes set up by local election authorities at early voting sites. Voters will still have the option to vote in person as normal, either through early voting or election day voting. My colleague, Jack Rothman, will be providing additional links in the chat box below where you can get more information about mail-in voting. So with that being said, we know that there's a lot at stake on November the 3rd, both in Washington, D.C. and Springfield. As Representative Kelly stated earlier, elections have consequences. Here in Illinois, voters will have the opportunity to vote on the Fair Tax Constitutional Amendment and elect their new representatives in the Illinois General Assembly. It's important to note that these new representatives will be tasked with redrawing the state's congressional and legislative district lines following the 2020 census. But what's at stake on? We've talked about a number of these issues that are played with this election: healthcare access and equity through the protection and strengthening of the Affordable Care Act, additional efforts to recover from COVID-19, the restoration of the Voting Rights Act, passing the Equality Act that prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, comprehensive criminal justice, police accountability reform, and also the balance of power on the Supreme Court, which is really, really important. And so these are some of the very important issues, and even more as we look into the new session of the General Assembly in Springfield, but also the 117th Congress that will begin in January. So with that, is Senator Durbin? Yes. See, he's made it on. To tackle these important issues again, we need strong and consistent leadership on Capitol Hill. It's now my distinct honor to introduce one of those types of leaders, a longtime friend of the LGBTQ community, the senior senator from Illinois and Democratic Whip, Senator Dick Durbin. Senator Durbin.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to make brief remarks and see if there are any questions from those who are attending. I know you have others on the program, and I thank you all for coming together. So last night, I sat down and watched the Republican National Convention. I felt like I owed myself that much, so that if I'm going to comment on the differences between our parties, I better understand the different messages that are coming out of the different conventions. And if you did tune in, or if you watched any news coverage, you will see that there is a looming threat to America of Marxism, socialism, Fidel Castro's form of government, all sorts of threats, looting, violence, and vandalism. And according to the Republican convention, America should be very much afraid. I don't think America is very much afraid of those items. I think America is very concerned about the fact that we don't have the right leadership when it comes to the public health crisis we are currently facing. Those who have faced the HIV/AIDS challenge over the years know that without the right leadership, you cannot really make progress when it comes to public health. In the early days of HIV/AIDS in the Reagan administration, this so-called gay plague was treated as somewhat of a joke. Sad to say, that was the reality. It took a long period of time for America to wake up to the threat and to deal with it in more mature ways, and we are still struggling to reach that goal. But important things have happened over the years, and I thank all of you who are engaged in this foundation's work for your public information effort. I recall my first campaign for the United States Senate and a fellow named Michael Bauer, who came along and sat down and talked to me about the reality of HIV/AIDS and what it meant to the Chicago community. He and his partner, Michael and Roger, I should say, his partner, have been dear friends. I still am saddened by Michael's passing. He had so many efforts to reach out into the community and to bring the message out to politicians of both political parties. But the reality is today that we have to look at the public health crisis we currently face with coronavirus and put it in the context of our experience and the goals we still have when it comes to HIV/AIDS. First and foremost, we have learned that ignorance is no defense. We've got to be honest about the reality of the public health threat. And the early days of denial or some politicking on this issue when it came to HIV/AIDS just cost lives. People did not get the help that they needed at the time that they needed. We are better today, but we're still not where we need to be. We need to extend the reach of health insurance even more in this country. Now, some on the Republican side may call that socialism or Marxism, that the government wants to extend health insurance. But I just want to tell you, I don't believe that it's taking my freedom away to say that I can afford to buy prescription drugs. I don't think it's any threat to my liberty if there's a guarantee that no health insurance plan can discriminate against a person because of pre-existing conditions. In my mind, that is what happens in an orderly society. If you just leave it to the vicissitudes of the marketplace, there's no telling where it will end up. So here are the things that need to be done. First, the Affordable Care Act, which provides 20 million Americans with health insurance they otherwise would not have, must be protected. The Republicans in the House and in the Senate, as well as the President and in the Supreme Court, have done everything they can to eliminate this program. 20 million Americans count on it for health insurance. Over half of those who were protected in Illinois by it had no insurance before it happened. And what's the alternative that they're offering? There is none. There is none. They don't have an alternative. I think we can improve the Affordable Care Act if we can work together in a sensible bipartisan basis. But this notion of going to the Supreme Court and eliminating it, to me, is madness. And it just means that more and more Americans are not going to have the protection they need when they need it. So open the enrollment period so that those who need to enroll in it get a chance. The opposite has occurred under the Trump administration. They have reduced the advertising for open enrollment. They've reduced the period of eligibility. They've done everything they can to starve this program. Secondly, we've got to extend the reach of Medicaid in every state. Illinois has that extension. We need more help from the federal government paying for their share. But in states that have not voted for this Medicaid extension, we have to have what Joe Biden is proposing, an expansion of a public health plan so that those people are going to have protection. Haven't we learned the hard way when it comes to a public health crisis, everybody has to be on board. this notion that we're going to exclude people from health care for political reasons, for immigration reasons, whatever they are, has reached the point where we're paying a heavy price for it. If you're sitting on that CTA train, the fact that the person sitting next to you is an immigrant makes no difference when it comes to the transmission of coronavirus. In fact, we see that in some groups, African American and Latino groups, there's a higher incidence of infection. We've got to do more to address that issue. In terms of the election itself, it's going to be interesting. We have something like 10 weeks left. That isn't much. People are going to start receiving their ballots here in Illinois on September 24th. Many more will receive mail-in ballots than have in the past. That's what the General Assembly decided to do. I think it was a wise decision. People ought to be able to vote in the safety of their homes if they wish. That is their decision. And we know, despite this president's lies, and I just call it for what it is, lies about fraud when it comes to mail-in ballots, it continues to be one of the safest, most honest and accurate ways to vote. Now we're in a battle with the Postal Service. And isn't this interesting? Of all things, the Trump administration realized this government undertaking called the Postal Service had a lot of friends and fans across America. Over 90% of Americans have a favorable view toward the Postal Service. Sure, we complain about some things and delivery and the like, but when it comes to the basic notion of 6 days a week, someone delivering your mail, Americans are pretty proud of that, and they want it to continue. So when we get a new Postmaster General who decides he's going to so-called pivot away from overtime, it just means more mail and packages stacked up at the post office. Now, for a lot of Americans, this is the most personal delivery of government services on a daily basis. And so many of them view it as important to their lives and their livelihood. We as politicians think about ballots in the mail, of course. That's our political life or death situation. But most Americans think about the mail service in terms of the delivery of prescription drugs. That's becoming more and more common. Over 1 billion drugs are being delivered during the course of the year by the Postal Service. More and more elderly people, disabled people, and others count on that delivery for discount pricing and also for the convenience of having it come to your home rather than have to go to the drugstore to pick it up. So when it comes to slowing down mail, when it comes to letting it stack up at the mail stations and such, that to me is unacceptable, and most Americans agree. We've got to make sure that this lifeline of our mail is protected. And I think the message has come through to the Trump administration that if they step in the way, the American people are going to remember on Election Day. So let me stop at this point and say thank you for all that you've done to keep this work on HIV/AIDS alive, to make sure that this generation continues to fight for the progress that we've made and even more in the future. We need to continue our research. We need to continue our outreach. We need to continue to make health insurance affordable and accessible and quality care for all Americans. So let me stop at this point. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer.
Thank you so much, Senator Durbin, for being able to join us today. I'm Kim Hunt, Executive Director of Pride Action Tank, Project of AIDS Foundation, Chicago. I think we have time for one question, and this question actually came from the registration poll that where folks were able to submit questions and comments. And the question is, how are you, and by this I think they mean you and your colleagues in the Senate, preparing to govern if the GOP loses control of the Senate?
Well, I can tell you a number of things, and let's start at the top. If you believe in the power of prayer, some do, some don't, but if you believe in it, please include Ruth Bader Ginsburg in your intentions, because we want her to survive for a long, long time. But certainly we're wishing her the very best until we put in a new president who might fill that vacancy if necessary. And I pray that it won't be, but if it is, it starts with the Supreme Court. That Supreme Court is 5-4 at this moment. Shifting the balance one seat on the court could make all the difference in the world. So we need to have a president and a Senate to make sure that happens at all levels when it comes to the federal judiciary. That's one of the first things. The second thing that we have to do is to address this coronavirus and what it's doing to America. It is just incredible to think of this. America has 4% of the world's population and 20% of the deaths from coronavirus. 4% of the population, 20% of the deaths. How did this modern, developed, civilized nation end up with such a terrible record? Well, I can tell you it starts at the top. The buck stops in the Oval Office. This president has played games with this terrible public health crisis. Remember when he said we didn't have to worry about it, it was going to go away, wait till the sun comes out and all the rest of that craziness? Remember when he came up with his medical quackery theories, let's just drink a glass of disinfectant and go out and get some ultraviolet rays inside our body, and who knew what was next in that? Then he rejected the experts, the people who had to sit down and tell him the truth, and he ignored. Then he turned around and did exactly the opposite of what he should have done. Instead of leading the nation in dealing with this, he said to the governors, good luck. Mayors, good luck. Find the equipment that you need. I may be there to help if you're a Republican. I may not if you're a Democrat. So when it comes to coronavirus, the American people identify this as the #1 challenge overall. They realize if we don't get that right, a lot of things won't follow. The second thing, of course, is get the economy back on its feet. I mean, it is hard to imagine what's happened to the United States. We have per capita 3 times the unemployment of any nation on earth because of this pandemic. Why in the world did it hit us so darn hard, so much more than other places? Because we didn't have a plan and we didn't have leadership. And the American people get it. When you ask folks, do you like the way America is moving at this point? 23% say yes, 77% say no. And that just tells you what this president faces in the election. So what they're trying to do in the convention is to create a lot of scary things that don't relate to coronavirus and don't relate to this president's record. America knows better. We're a lot smarter than that. I think we're going to get the kind of leadership, I hope we do, on November 3rd to move us forward.
Thank you so much, Senator Durbin. I know you're super busy, so we are really fortunate to even have 10 minutes of your time today. So thank you for stopping by. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for your great work. Keep going. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. Well, folks, we have had a full morning. We have covered a lot of ground, as I said we would, and we're going to get you out of here on time. So again, I want to thank Senator Durbin for taking time to be with us today. Also, Representatives Mike Quigley, Raja Krishnamoorthi, Robin Kelly, and Jan Schakowsky. Thank you to any state and local elected or appointed officials who are on the line today. Thank you for what you do and for joining us, as well as the staffers for all of our elected officials who are here with us today. Thank you also to the co-hosts for today's event, Equality Illinois and the Human Rights Campaign Chicago, to our panelists and speakers, Aisha N. Davis, Quinn Rallins, Oswaldo Alvarez, Justin Kuzak, I never say Justin's last name right, so I'm not even going to attempt it, Mike Zuri and Tim Jackson. We can't forget our behind-the-scenes magicians, particularly Jack Rothman. And most of all, I want to thank all of you for getting up so early and being present. We're all 501c3 organizations, so I want to point out that we did invite all members of the Illinois Congressional Delegation, and these are the folks who showed up today. So we thank them all. We thank you all for being engaged. Don't forget to apply for your mail-in ballot. Election day is Tuesday, November 3rd, and do not forget to fill out your census form. Have a fantastic day, and thank you for joining us.